Hi guys, it's Miss Checka. Once again, I am at Christ Church College at Oxford University, and I know I look a little rough, but don't judge. I'm wearing this amazing Millennium Falcon t-shirt, and what more do you want, right? I have a couple of things to say, mostly about Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland, because that all started right here in this college. I've told you in other videos, Oxford University is actually made of a series of colleges. Well, Christ Church is the big one. I mean, it is bigger by an order of magnitude than the other colleges. It's really huge. It's very ornate. It's very, very beautiful. When you walk around on the inside of it, in the dining halls and the picture gallery, it's very easy to picture yourself in kind of this world almost from the Middle Ages, right? In fact, if you were to go inside, some of it would look familiar to you because that's where they filmed a lot of the Harry Potter movies. And in fact, you know, when those books are being written, when you picture the big giant dining hall with the high table and stuff, that's Christ Church. So that's what the colleges look like here at Oxford. But I want to talk to you specifically about Lewis Carroll, whose name wasn't Lewis Carroll at all. His name was Charles Dodgson. So Charles Dodgson, back in the 1800s, was a kid who went to this college. His dad also went to this college. He studied math here. He wasn't a super student, was not a super student. Some years he excelled a lot and he won awards, and other years he didn't quite make it up to the mark. But in the end, he finished his academic career really strongly because he got a job here teaching. So he taught here for, I think, something like 26 years. He never married, which is not uncommon. Actually, for centuries, you couldn't get married and teach at Oxford University because everybody was going to take orders in the church. So that wasn't true when he was alive, but it was still not that unusual for a guy to be a scholar and kind of just totally dedicated to his scholarship. The particular kind of math that he studied was logic. So a lot of the books that he wrote were on logical reasoning, logical puzzles, syllogisms, Aristotelian logic. And, you know, he also had some downtime. It's not that fun sometimes being a bachelor all on your own. So he used to hang out a lot with the Liddell family. Now, Mr. Liddell, or Professor Liddell, was actually very high-ranking here at Christ Church, and he was married and he did have kids. He actually had a bunch of daughters, and one of the daughters was named Alice. And Charles Dodgson would take Alice and her sisters, and they would go around this area that you see. In front of me, there's a huge meadow. If you keep walking down there, you see a river, and it's very common here at Oxford to go punting down a river. So a punt looks a little bit like a canoe with a flat bottom. So he used to take the Liddell children. They'd go punting, they'd go on picnics, they'd run around Christ Church, but sometimes the kids would get bored, as kids are wont to do. And one particular afternoon, Charles Dodgson starts telling them stories, and he used the girls as characters in the story. So, you know, he named, like, one of the sisters was named Edith, and so he made her into an eaglet. He put himself in there, so he had a stutter. So when he would say his own last name, Dodgson, it would come out da 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 da. So he made himself the dodo. And actually, here in the city of Oxford at the Natural History Museum, they have a stuffed dodo, one of the, like, the last ones. So this would be something that would have been in his mind, that the kids would have seen. He kind of pulled all these elements from his imagination, and he turned one of the kids, Alice, into the main characters of his stories. So he told them these stories, he would illustrate the stories and write them down, and eventually he published them into a book. And it really is wonderful. Sorry, I didn't mean to pun, but it is delightful if you're physically in this area to see a lot of the landscapes that he's describing, the flowers, the animals. A lot of that comes from the city of Oxford, from this meadow from the river that's there. It's fun to see. You can see where he got inspired from. He was just pulling from his environment, right? So two things. One, something that's interesting about the book Alice in Wonderland is that up until that point, most stories for children that were written by official children's authors were written to tell a story, right? So folk stories mostly had a moral point to them, or poems for children had a moral point to them. So I give you an example. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. What happens to her, right? Little Red Riding Hood. What happens to her? There's just story after story of little kids who disobey, or they eat something they're not supposed to eat, or they do something they're not supposed to eat, and then they die these like really gory and awful deaths, or they almost do, right? I mean, Little Red Riding Hood's a pretty grim story. So one of the fun things about Alice in Wonderland, and one of the reasons it became immediately so popular, is that it doesn't have any of that. None of that. That's what happens when you have a mathematician who is not a children's book author write a children's book story, right? Not only is there no moral, there's no kind of central quest other than who am I? So it's literally a story about a little kid who does all of the things that we tell little kids not to do. Follow that random rabbit. Literally, drink this bottle of mysterious liquids. And instead of meeting with terrible, terrible consequences, she just has like fun adventures and meets all these different characters. He also puts poems in there that were originally meant to tell a lesson, like Father William and the Bumblebee, How Doth the Little Bumblebee. And instead of having a lesson in them, he changes them so that they're absurd or they're jokey or they're whatever. So that's one of the reasons that his stories were wildly, wildly popular. Last thing to think about, he was a little bit of a weirdo. A little bit of a weirdo. There's some controversy about him as a person. I will leave that to you to decide, but he was just sort of an eccentric guy, very much a scholar, who also wrote these crazy, crazy children's stories. I mean, and if you read Alice in Wonderland and if you read Through the Looking Glass, like they are pretty deeply weird. So that is Charles Dodgson, which is the real name of Lewis Carroll, who wrote those stories and imagined those stories right here at Christ Church College. All right, check it out.